all my regrets and all my acclaim, the joy and the pain, I'm making them yours.
Things in the past, things yet unseen, wishes and dreams that are yet to come true. All of my hopes, all of my plans, my heart and my hands are lifted to you.
Lord, I offer my life to you, everything I've been through. Use it for your glory, and Lord, I offer my days to you, lifting my praise to you as a pleasing sacrifice. Lord, I offer you my life.
A pleasant day to each and every one of you. Today marks the first day of our 3-meeting-long class for lesson number 2 entitled Poetry, Creating Picture Through Words. And without further ado, let's begin with a question. Why are we writing? We all have our own reasons. And one might say that writing is his passion, while the other one might admit that writing is just boring from his perspective. But keep in mind that for now we must be poets. And one cannot be a poet if one reason for writing poetry is I have important things that I want to say. But if one reason is I like hanging around words and listening to what they say, then that person could indeed be a poet. That came from British American poet W.H. Auden. And what does it mean? Of all the literary genres, poetry is notable for using a few words to convey a lot. In few lines, the vastness of the world becomes small, and the small becomes vast. Does this sound magical? This ability of the poem to turn big something that is small, or small into something big. This may have something to do with the origin of the word poet. It came from the Latin word poeta and the Greek poetus, which means maker, creator, or composer. In ancient Greek, poetry was called poeo, or I create. You might say that a poet creates a world by assembling words. The principle less is more comes into full view in a poem. Haiku, an ancient Japanese form of poetry, is remarkable for only using 3 lines with 17 syllables, which is the 5-7-5 pattern. Let's hang around of Old Pond, a well-known haiku by Basho Matsuo, a famous poet of 15th century Japan. The Old Pond. An old silent pond. Frog jumps into the pond. Splash! Silence again. This poem is an unfolding present moment of a frog jumping. As you can see on the lines, a frog jumps. Yet it also conveys something old. The silent pond, which is the first line, which have the element of silence and also the past. Next up is in the last line, Basho puts silence and the loudness of a splash together. Splash! Silence again. And you can see here the loudness and silence on the line. The use of contrast, of putting the similar elements together, is a notable feature of haikus. In the Old Pond, these contrasting elements are silence and loudness, present and past. Haiku are known for revealing the vastness of nature in an intimate and microscopic matter. The old pond is a snapshot of a particular moment in one small portion of the environment. Frogs are usually imagined as singing. Basho, however, hung around with this convention and decided to write about frog leaping into the water. Writing haikus is a good exercise in putting thoughts together in the shortest and clearest manner. Here's another example. It's the end of the day, the start of a dazzling night for the moon and stars. In writing haiku, you can use details that can be seen or grasped by the five senses, which is the sight, smell, taste, hearing, or touch. On this example, we can say that we have the sense of sight in play. In order for us to imagine the moon and the stars in a dazzling night, we must use the sense of sight. Now, let's talk about the lines. Unlike a short story or a novel, which is written in paragraphs, a poem is written in lines. The lines give shape to the poem, and line arrangement creates an impact on the reader. Lined up as well is a white space between the stanzas, between each word, and the presence or absence of punctuation. Think of the lines as putting the reader in a state of suspense or anticipation, so that he or she would really want to follow each line until the last. Stimulate your reader's curiosity, lead them through the middle of the poem, and make them fulfilled, shocked, saddened, afraid, or joyful in the end. Now let's read another example of a poem. Forest with Corners, written by Joel Toledo. A leaf quivers in anger, because the wind makes it brittle, yet cannot fell. The trunk storms live inside this arrangement. We can see that from this very particular arrangement of words, we've come up to the idea that the wind is blowing so hard that leaves from a tree is shaking very violently, and it is imposed at the last part of the poem that a storm is brewing. However, if I read it like this one, a leaf quivers in anger because the wind makes it brittle, yet it cannot fell the trunk. The storms live inside its arrangement. On this one, we can see that the feeling that it gave us is really different from the way that the feeling on the first version of it, as I read it, gave us, right? All in all, we can say that the proper arrangement of the lines and words in a poem gives it more impact to us, the readers. So it is very important for us to align and put up the words in a specific manner, arrange it in a specific manner in order for the readers to feel what we really want them to feel. And how you're going to do that? Well, it's easy. You just have to practice. Practice and practice and much more practice. Got it? Next. Some would say that poetry is difficult to define, while others say it is difficult to understand. You may think the same way, and this attitude about poetry is quite reasonable. But let us try to understand this difficulty in defining poetry from these personalities. First off, we have the British writer, Jeanette Winterson, who had a difficult childhood and realized that reading poems made her troubled youth bearable. For her, a tough life needs a tough language, and that is what poetry is. Poetry's toughness comes from the toughness of life. And this one is very relatable to me since when I was back in college and I've been having some, difficulties in my personal life, I usually tend to go to poetry and just write it off. And I could clearly say and tell to you that it is really helpful for me to bear all of the pains, such as the stress, the problems that I do have back in my college days, and the other things that makes me feel troubled back then. It's the poetry that saved me. Well, aside from the Lord, of course, it is poetry that helped me through those dark times. Next up is from the writer Paul Celan. He is a Romanian-born German-speaking poet and regarded his poetry as the messages in a bottle, and that would one day wash up on the shore. He wrote one such message, a poem entitled To a Brother in Asia. Here, Celan captures the blazing battles of the Vietnam War in his hope of a decising ending to all wars. Despite calls for a war to end, there is always more war. Enough reason, perhaps, for poets to continue writing a message in a bottle till it reaches the shore of the land of peace. And this part we can say that poetry for Paul Celan, poetry is a petition, a way of opening the eyes of others into what is happening right now. And we can actually relate to this one since this is one of the most common assignments in high school. Write a poem or poetry regarding this certain national issue or political issue, right? And I know that you've already written a lot of those types of literary compositions. And I know that you have a lot of experience writing such literary compositions from various subjects, either on Filipino or in English. And we can say that this one really helps us in order for us to show what we do really feel about a certain matter and somewhat help other people see what we are seeing, right? And in a sense, we're helping them to open their minds and eyes onto what is happening in the world. Next up is from a writer named Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says that poetry was already written even before writing began. In his essay, The Poet, he defines poetry as an act of entering a region where the air is music, which was written by those with sensitive ears, and that region was nature, which he finds attractive, pleasant, and sensible. In that region, the poet is a namer, a language maker, who names objects in their appearance or essence. In other words, poets create words, and a poem is but an act of naming, of expressing. As such, poetic words are also actions, and actions are a kind of words. And from Ralph Waldo Emerson's perspective, writing is our nature as a human being. It is our nature to write the things that we have seen, to write the things that is all about the nature itself, about how we live, about how other people live, about how nature helps us, and how the things here in our world generates or works. And that is quite real since we do have this kind of genre which is the nature writing, right? For Ralph Waldo Emerson, writing is nature for us. It is very nature for us in a sense that it's as if writing is a part of our lives. And I do believe on that also, since just on what we are doing right now, while we are studying, we are in turn, while we're studying, we've had written a lot and pages by pages of literary compositions and just notes, right? So we can say that writing is really a part of our life. It is nature of us to write. And he also says that one of the greatest topics for us to write about is the nature itself. All in all, we can say that poetry is there to help us to become a much more better person. And how do poetry helps that? For example, helping us to cope up on those different and difficult times. It helps us to open our eyes to the world that we live in, to the issues that we must address, and to the problems that we must face. The last is poetry is there for us to be much more rooted to the nature that we love, for us to know what nature is, to love what nature have to offer. Now let's remember that words are powerful, so choose wisely the words that you will write, speak, or even think. Now for your activity, please write a haiku for the following titles. This is to be made on a short bond paper. The number one title is River. The number two is the wave. Three is the sky. It could be the night sky or the daylight sky. The last one is a flower. This is the reference that I've used for today, and also I would like to share to you the book that I've been using. It is entitled Creative Nonfiction, written by Lorna Q. Israel and published by Vibal. Now for the credits, the slides carnival, and the photos by the Unsplash. And yeah, that's it for today. And I do hope to see you again on our next topic. Bye bye and good luck for your activities.